Canada becoming a natural resource global powerhouse is a big talking point on the federal election trail.
Premier David Eby is defending the government's approval of a new pipeline project that will supply natural gas to a proposed floating LNG terminal just north of Prince Rupert.
The supply to get to 12 to 15, we have the engineering know-how, and the demand is there. One of the things that's brought this opportunity back around for Canada.
14 million tons of liquefied natural gas, valued at a staggering 40 billion Canadian dollars, have officially departed from Canada's Comet port, setting course directly for North Asia, all without relying on a single inch of U.S. pipeline infrastructure. This marks a historic turning point for Canada, its first ever independent LNG export, and a symbolic economic blow aimed squarely at Washington's energy dominance. That same night, Prime Minister Mark Carney privately messaged his cabinet, declaring that the East-West Pipeline Initiative had been designated a national strategic project. The wheels are in motion now, and there is no reversing course. The White House was left scrambling, as this bold move puts the spotlight on the fact that 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports still flow south into American markets. With a single decision, Carney cracked open the valve that could redirect billions of dollars away from U.S. refineries and into new global markets. If Ottawa ever decides to close the northern spigot, it raises a chilling question for Washington, who picks up America's next energy tab. And more importantly, what geopolitical consequences will unfold from this shift? Make sure to follow Deep State for continuing coverage on Canada's LNG expansion and geopolitical implications. Subscribe and hit the bell so you're the first to know. In just 10 days, the LNG vessel Gaslod Glasgow completed its voyage from Comet to South Korea, slicing in half the time it takes for U.S. LNG tankers that must navigate the costly and congested Panama Canal. Every mile saved not only accelerates delivery but obliterates the economic advantage once held by American exports. With no U.S. tariffs in play, every cent of savings adds fuel to Canada's momentum. Yet this isn't just about shorter shipping lanes. The real battleground is Asia. By 2025, the continent will account for an estimated 60% of global LNG imports. For every 3 LNG cargoes arriving in metropolises like Tokyo, Shanghai, or Seoul, nearly 2 are expected to originate from Pacific-adjacent producers, and now, Canada is poised to be chief among them. Once merely a secondary route for Houston's overflow, Canada is rapidly transforming into a premier high-speed fueling station positioned perfectly to serve Northeast Asia. The engine of this transformation is the LNG Canada project, a $40 billion undertaking and the single largest private investment in Canadian history. On June 30th, the project's inaugural shipment of 14 million tons per year was fully loaded and dispatched, a milestone achieved without leaning on American infrastructure. The massive venture is backed by an international powerhouse consortium that includes Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Kogas, all of whom have collaborated to build the 670-kilometer coastal GasLink pipeline that transports natural gas from British Columbia's Montney region straight to Tidewater. Currently, Train 1, with a capacity of 6.5 million tons annually, is up and running. Train 2 is expected to become operational next year, doubling annual output to 14 million tons, with even further expansion already in the planning stages. While technical limitations have initially capped output at 0.4 billion cubic feet per day, analysts from Reuters project the facility will ramp up to its full capacity of 1 billion cubic feet daily by Q4, just as global storage levels approach saturation. With each outbound tanker, Canadian LNG continues to undercut U.S. Henry Hub prices, effectively peeling away the protective layers from former President Trump's tariff-driven trade strategy. Prime Minister Carney now wields an extraordinary level of economic leverage, with the power to open or close gas flows with pinpoint political accuracy. Asia's demand is insatiable. Canada's supply is ready. And the U.S. may find itself ironically queued behind its northern neighbor if it hopes to keep the lights on in energy-thirsty states like California. And every time Washington threatens a retaliatory tariff, global markets respond with indifference, because the real energy price signals now originate from Canada's Latitude 54, not the DC Beltway. In a tit-for-tat world of trade disputes, Canada's LNG now rides the wave of independence, setting sail from Kitimat's wide-open Pacific gateway that's unlikely to ever shut again. In a recent interview with the Calgary Herald, Prime Minister Carney confirmed the likelihood of designating a new Alberta to Pacific pipeline as a national essential project, a move that could slash red tape and reduce approval times from years to just a few short months. This isn't political theater. Parliament has already passed the landmark One Canadian Economy Act, designed to unify regulatory processes, remove interprovincial barriers, and fast-track strategic infrastructure, especially energy pipelines. When completed, this proposed pipeline would move crude oil directly from Alberta's prolific oil fields to the Port of Vancouver, entirely bypassing U.S. refineries in the Midwest and East Coast. As of April 2025, those American facilities consume roughly 3.75 million barrels per day of Canadian crude, based on Energy Information Administration data. The strategic implications of cutting off that flow are staggering. If Alberta oil no longer pours into cities like Chicago, Detroit, or Philadelphia, those tanks would run dangerously dry. U.S. refineries would be forced to import Canadian crude back via seaborne routes, triggering higher transportation and insurance costs significantly above the rates locked in by pipelines. It would be a logistical nightmare and an economic wake-up call for Washington. Canada's energy independence is no longer a dream, it's a functioning export machine. And for the first time in decades, Ottawa, not Washington, holds the lever that can throttle or unleash the flow of energy across North America and the Pacific. Ottawa has taken to heart the painful lessons of the Trans Mountain expansion saga, where prolonged legal resistance from Indigenous communities nearly brought the project to a standstill. This time around, Prime Minister Carney's government is adopting a more strategic approach, securing benefit agreements with Indigenous groups early on, pledging to honor territorial rights, and injecting funds directly into community development before construction even begins. The result is a blueprint of reconciliation that has muted opposition from the outset, ensuring the pipeline proceeds without legal entanglements. Once complete, this new pipeline will catapult Vancouver into the position of North America's leading oil export gateway, marginalizing the Gulf Coast and Mexico's network to secondary status. In fact, Canada broke records in July 2024 by exporting 4.3 million barrels per day to the United States, the moment the Trans Mountain expansion went live. With this new corridor, Alberta's crude will bypass U.S. refineries entirely, flowing directly to Asia and Latin America via British Columbia's coast. So, what does this mean for Trump's aggressive tariff rhetoric? His threats of imposing 25% duties on Canadian oil and gas may sound intimidating, but once Canadian energy secures new global markets, those declarations lose their teeth. Each time Carney announces a pipeline milestone, the price of Western Canada Select crude temporarily dips to keep U.S. customers engaged, which simultaneously floods the market with oil and neutralizes tariff leverage. In a world riddled with geopolitical friction, this pipeline is more than infrastructure, it's a strategic masterstroke that asserts Canada's energy independence, market diversification, and permanent escape from American leverage. Once Alberta's pipeline to Vancouver is live, there's no turning back. The U.S. cannot blockade what now flows straight to the open sea. Even as the U.S. hits record crude oil production, nearly 13.4 million barrels per day, it faces its own bottlenecks. Major domestic pipelines like Keystone XL, Mountain Valley, and Constitution remain bogged down by endless environmental lawsuits, preventing their oil from reaching refineries. Meanwhile, Canada's completed pipeline routes its supply westward, and U.S. refineries in cities like Chicago and Philadelphia, which typically depend on 3.4 million barrels of Canadian oil per day, may be forced to turn to more expensive Middle Eastern crude priced at a $3 premium. That small gap adds up fast, raising gasoline production costs and threatening to spike Midwest retail gas prices, despite EIA predictions of $3.10 per gallon in Q3 2025. In this landscape, Trump's 35% tariff threats on all Canadian imports, including energy, look more like political theater than economic force. The truth is Canadian energy prices have decoupled from White House declarations. Every tanker leaving Canada's KDIA terminal now does so on its own terms, outside the influence of USMCA trade pressures. Even Trump's threat to slap a 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals from Europe and Canada has failed to reverse pharma outsourcing or energy independence. Canada's ability to control its energy taps, both pipeline and LNG, has turned into a powerful bargaining tool. As the US struggles to preserve access to Alberta's cheap fuel, it finds itself cornered on two fronts, losing its affordable oil source and watching Canada slash the LNG shipping time to Asia from 20 days to just 10, undermining US competitiveness in the region. The message is clear: Canada isn't backing down. It's rising. And for the first time in decades, Washington must play by Ottawa's energy rules. As long as U.S. pipeline construction continues to be delayed by legal challenges and environmental opposition, and as long as tariff threats from Washington remain confined to social media posts rather than becoming actionable policy, Canada will continue using this moment to flip the script. It's no longer playing the role of quiet supplier to the American energy market, particularly the Gulf Coast. Instead, Canada is actively redirecting its energy strategy, shifting exports away from a historically dependent U.S. relationship and leveraging this reverse shock to tilt the geopolitical energy balance in its favor. With every move, Ottawa is essentially forcing Washington into a reactive position, compelled to respond rather than lead. In such a scenario, any proposed U.S. tariffs or embargoes lose their potency, becoming little more than symbolic gestures. This unfolding power shift is already being felt at the gas pump. U.S. average gasoline prices have reached a seasonal high of $3.13 per gallon due to rising summer demand, and this may only be the beginning. If Canada diverts more of its crude exports to the Pacific markets through pipelines like Trans Mountain, Midwest refineries, which currently depend on Canada for 66.1% of their crude oil imports, will face a harsh reality. To maintain operations, they would need to turn to alternative sources, such as heavy and more expensive crude from the Middle East. The outcome would be a sharp uptick in refining costs. Experts estimate that pump prices could rise by 30 cents per gallon, a nearly 10% spike over today's prices. This increase would hit the American heartland the hardest. Contrary to political pledges to keep fuel prices low, drivers in states like Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois would be among the first to feel financial pressure. A simple fill-up of a 20-gallon tank could suddenly cost an additional $5 to $8. The impact doesn't stop at the gas station. As transportation costs climb, shipping rates for everyday essentials, groceries, clothing, household supplies, will rise too. For millions of suburban and rural families who rely on their vehicles for daily tasks, higher gas prices could force tough decisions, like reducing discretionary travel or even skipping errands altogether. The effects would ripple out across the economy. Trucking and logistics companies, squeezed by rising diesel costs, will have no choice but to pass those expenses down the supply chain, meaning higher costs for consumers across the board. In a situation where tariff threats are not enforced and supply lines become strained, it's not just gas prices that go up, it's the quality of life that begins to erode. Americans will feel the squeeze in their everyday routines, not in some abstract geopolitical debate. Prime Minister Mark Carney chose August 1st as the deadline for a reason. It's not arbitrary. It's strategically placed, giving the Alberta to Vancouver pipeline project just enough time to approach a critical juncture, a point of no return. The deadline is tight enough to force the White House into a pressure cooker of second-guessing, trying to anticipate Ottawa's next step. Once the final steel segments are welded deep beneath the mountain passes of British Columbia, Washington's ability to influence the project or reverse course with diplomatic pressure becomes virtually nil. At that point, any threats of tariffs or economic consequences from the US would be as ineffective as trying to hold back a tide with a picket sign. But this is only the beginning. If Canada proceeds with constructing an additional LNG, liquefied natural gas, terminal at Prince Rupert, a remote but strategically vital location on its northwest coast, the global map of energy distribution will change once again. That port would enable LNG shipments to Asia in just 8 days, a staggering advantage over current US LNG ports in Texas and Louisiana, which take nearly 3 times as long. In that future, North America won't just be a contested zone for tariffs and supply threats, it will become a battleground in the race to dominate global energy logistics and speed to market. From that lens, every blustering tweet out of Washington threatening to impose tariffs ranging from 25% to 100% on Canadian energy will seem like an empty warning: too late, too slow, too disconnected from the on-the-ground shifts already underway. The US, even as it races to develop domestic pipeline infrastructure, remains bogged down in its own bureaucratic and legal morass, lawsuits, protests from indigenous communities, environmental blockades, while Ottawa moves with deliberate speed and quiet ruthlessness, securing alliances with global energy giants like Shell, Petronas, and Mitsubishi. These aren't just investors. They're strategic partners with the power to redirect billions in energy capital toward Canada's future exports. That leaves the White House with a sobering question: how does it plan to secure America's access to cheap, reliable Canadian oil? Does it play it safe, shelving tariffs and preserving the existing energy partnership with Canada, even if the power dynamics have shifted? Or does it double down with aggressive trade measures, risking even higher fuel prices for American consumers in a bet to maintain economic leverage? The bigger question is, are U.S. policymakers prepared for what American families will face in the meantime? Because beyond the boardrooms and trade negotiations, it's everyday people who will absorb the consequences. Rising gas prices, increased shipping costs, reduced mobility, and higher bills for everything from milk to medicine. So what's the smarter strategy in this high-stakes energy and tariff standoff that could reshape global supply chains and redefine transatlantic influence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Washington should ease off on tariff threats and focus on securing stable energy partnerships? Or should it take a harder stance, even at the cost of higher prices at home? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Deep State and tap the notification bell to stay ahead of the stories that shape the world.